Well, this is a restart. I've absolutely no explanation of what's just happened. Kicked out of that hangout there and I couldn't get back in. So I'm just going to carry on from, pretty much we'll just start the presentation thing again. I'm not going to bother with the intro types. So just a quick kind of summary for anybody who's new into this. The people here, me, I can only speak for me. Flat Earth is just a term for refusal of the globe. The globe is something that I looked at and assumed to be true my whole life. And when I addressed those assumptions and tried to justify the belief and maintaining the belief, I couldn't justify maintaining that belief. So, you know, the progression now is about exploration of the objective world and separating the sciences and understanding them for what they are, in particular mathematics and its place within objectivity and its place within the realms of fantasy. So again, I'm just going to make it a very brief introduction. You know, Flat Earth is just a title that's adopted and used. The only claim that I will make is that the Earth is demonstrably level, and anybody claiming that the pressurized environment that we live in exists within a medium like a vacuum or water, there must be a solid separation between those two mediums. Okay, natural science, the reality shows us that in order to even have pressure in the first place, we must have containment. In order to have a vacuum, we must have containment. The relationship between each other denotes that they must be solidly separated from each other or they will equilibrate. So anyway, I'm waffling through, skipping it. I have to because I'm annoyed. I had done an intro to the beginning of the original presentation, but for whatever reason we lost connection, or I lost connection and was kicked out of the hangout. And even, you know, usually if that happens I can get back into it. No, let me back in. So I can only apologise for the arsing about here, people. So Gav, you should have got that link.
I am here indeed.
Here. Well, sorry again, people. So we're talking about first principles. Here we're focusing on Euclid. You know, many people here, me in particular, talking about Euclidean principles and, you know, what's being applied in reality. And if we're using Euclidean principles based on the assumption that Earth is a plane, then that would tell you that Earth's a plane. You know, if these principles are working and being applied, then that's the case. But what we're looking at is what justifies these first principles. How did he come up with the theorems that he did? So that's what we're having a look at. So I'll not ask about any more, Gav. I'll just let you get back to the presentation part.
I'll just maybe start from the beginning.
Aye, of course.
Well done. So you should see a page, eh?
Hold on. Yep.
Yep, cool. Yeah, so, you know, I think what we want to go on is, as you said, Del, is look at Euclid's geometry and the first principles or axioms that he defined. But before we do that, I think we just wanted to give a bit more context about beliefs and reasons and logic. So I'll just hammer straight in. Without being too academic here, if I want to justify my belief, if I say that there's something, then I usually have to give a reason for it. And if I believe in something like Z, then I usually have to give a reason why, that I would believe in that. And then I have to justify what that why is, right? And if I then need to justify why, then I might have to come up with another reason. I'm calling it X, and so on and so on. So just to give an example here and to give a definition of what logic actually means, I'm starting up here with the proposition Z and asking how come I exist. And the reason that I will give to anybody who asks me that is because my parents gave birth to me. Then, of course, will come the question, well, how come your parents exist? Well, because my grandmothers gave birth to them. And how come they existed? Well, because their parents did. And as you can see that there's, you know, these reasons upon reasons upon reasons upon reasons, you can ask that all the way down, before I get into what that actually means, the description of what logic is just the description of how X, i.e. this implies Y and Z, yeah? Or another way of saying it is that Z and Y are logical consequences of X.
Yeah.
And I'm giving this definition here of logic because there's a few things about logic that people should know, and it's maybe not, necessarily widely taught. And one of the main things is that if you're going to prove something using a logical conclusion, then your premises need to be true. Because if your premises aren't true, you can still have a logical formal statement that has a conclusion, and it's only true if the premises are true. Yeah. So I think we're very badly conditioned from Spock and Star Trek Enterprise to believe that anything logical is necessarily true. Yeah. That is not the case. It's a very inconvenient but unquestionable truth of logic that you can be perfectly logical, and yet with false premises, you never say anything true. Yeah. And I think this is something where in this great discussion about, globe and flat and level, that's one of the things that sophists like to employ. Yeah. Yeah. And that they'll say, it's logical, it must be true. It's not the case. Yeah. And one of the other problems with this, whole thing about, having a reason and giving another reason is that they go on forever. And if something goes on forever, then nothing can ever be proven. Yeah. So it's a bit like the chicken and egg problem. Philosophically, it's an infinite regress of reason, is what it's called. And it's something that's been discussed for thousands of years. So this isn't us just pulling stuff out our arse, right? Yeah. This is a philosophical problem. And there's so many of them. I mean, if I take the Big Bang as an example, nothing, something comes from nothing, it's the same, philosophical problematic foundation that we're discussing here, yeah? Yeah. So how do you stop an infinite regress? If you have a belief and a conclusion and you have reasons for them, and you have to go all the way back giving reasons for your reasons for your reasons, the only way to stop that is that there must be some propositions that do not need to be proven, for whatever reason that might be. And I think that's what we're here to discuss, yeah. To look at that more carefully. Yeah. Yeah. So the problem of the infinite regress of reason actually ends if there are first principles that do not need to be proven. And for me, that's, if you like, the definition of a first principle. They do not need to be proven. So if you have a first principle, and you look at that, then the regress of reason, this problem stops. Yeah. And you can then think about the first principle similar to an axiom in geometry, for example, where you then go on to propose theorems based on that. Yeah. Yeah. And axioms are the first principles of any formal deductive system. We know that mathematics is a formal language. Yeah. It's not a natural science. Yeah. And you basically start with axioms, and from them you deduce theorems. So it's a deductive system as well. But for that, you need to basically say, I believe in these first principles, and these first principles can only be demonstrated, they cannot be proven. Yeah. I can say to you, look at that, and you can make the same self-evident good judgment, Dale, that these things are true, and we can agree on that. And that's where you can then start to reason with other people. You can discuss things together. But if you have no first principles which you share, then you have no possibility really to have a conversation.
Exactly.
So why do first principles not need to be proven? This is what they call the first principles of demonstration. And it is one of the philosophical things that we need to dive into more carefully. And the globe wants to avoid looking at these assumptions, these philosophical foundations, because, I think I've said this before, philosophy has such a heavy influence on science, on culture, on the arts, on a whole, host of things. If your philosophical foundations are such and such, then that really shapes a lot of the way society thinks. Yeah. So that's why I think it's always extremely important that these things are looked at.
Exactly.
And first principles for me are self-evident truths, right? We know them to be true just by understanding them. I'll give an example that I thought was brilliant when you took your little boy, Sander, and you asked him to transport water, right? Now, transporting water on the outside of a ball or in a container was something that your boy just did intuitively, right? You didn't need to teach him, you didn't need to tell him, you didn't need to educate him. It was for him a self-evident truth. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Well, I mean, that would have came a bit later when we get to the inductive deductive aspects of it, because at that age there's no formed reasoning at all. It's not based on any reasoning. It's based on self-evident fundamentals. I didn't have to be taught that. I didn't have to contemplate it or postulate anything other than his direct experience.
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah, so I mean, first principles are self-evident in that we also have to take them for granted in lived life, and we assent to them necessarily by our constitution. So for example, nobody needs to tell me how to swallow, right? Swallowing is something that is a self-evident truth that we all do. Nobody needs to tell me how to do it. Nobody had taught me how to do it. It's one of these things that I take for granted, and it's necessary. And that's just an example of a first principle. But when you look at what they do geometrically, and just to go back to this page beforehand, a first principle in mathematics is what they call an axiom, and Euclid is the very best example of somebody who wrote a definitive book called Euclid's Elements, which basically postulated five axioms as his first principles. And from those 5 axioms, he went on to deduce hundreds of theorems. And all these theorems are used in the practical daily life of everything ever constructed in the last 1,000 years, right? So there's a guy called Euclid starting with first principles, and everything that we build is based on basically what he then wrote about in that book. So that's why geometry is a prime example of using first principles. I think the fact that we have constructed all these things, whether it's canals, dams, bridges, you name it, it proves the point that the first principles were correct in what he used. So what can I say? Geometry is the best example of it. And even though some people would like to then go on to redefine words and definitions, which you can obviously do in a formal science like mathematics, the truth value of what's been said, I think, is justified because of the way people used his book, used his theorems to build the world. So, but some philosophers, and there's quite a few of them, came along basically after first principles was held to be true for, I don't know, maybe thousands of years. I can't tell, for example. But Hume and Kant, we're talking 300 years ago, were a couple of philosophers that came along and said, oh, well, first principles are not so self-evident. So, here's typical quotes from them. We can't ever really know them to be true, but I do agree that we must assume that they are true. So that's Hume's cop-out. And Kant's cop-out was, we could know them to be true, even though they can't be proven and are not self-evident. And today they have different meanings. They call it synthetic a priori. They call it axiomatic independence, blah, 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 right? But basically, they've done away with, the necessity of first principles and deduction, and they've replaced it with a kind of skeptical view of the world, which is what they like to do. So that, you're supposed to doubt everything. You're supposed to think you can never know anything. You're supposed to doubt your own sanity, your own mind, your own senses. Everything is to be doubted. And I think that's where philosophy went off the rails, if you ask me.
Well, that's to be doubted, but we have to place credence upon anything that these people say,
Oh yeah, you need the authority. And then they came along with this, idea of induction, promoted by a guy called Francis Bacon, a pretty mysterious figure. Before I delve in, but there's lots of stories about that man, whether he's Shakespeare, whether he's the bastard son of the royal family. Blah, blah, blah. But he was a highly influential figure, without any doubt. And basically all the way up until the last century, his view of science is what prevailed. And that was basically along the lines of inductive inferences, where you basically try and generalize individual events or objects. And the more you can count of these events or objects, then the more your inductive inference becomes true, or the generalization is correct.
Yeah.
But there is also a problem of induction, and that's the fact that there could always be something that crops up that falsifies it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you never really know how many individual events you actually need to count to be justified in making your generalization. And that's also one of the things that Bacon could never answer. Yeah. That induction actually never proves anything, because you're just making a general statement, and you're trying to count how many times it occurs, but something could always pop up that contradicts it. Yeah.
Yep.
So one of the questions, so we have, if you like, these two problems. How do you get past the regress of reason? Yeah, and you have to look at first principles, and how do you get past this problem of induction? Aristotle at the time reckoned it was a kind of intuitive jump that the mind made to achieve principles that are self-evident, rather than anything else. Now, that was Aristotle's view. I'm not sure I'm fully on board with that, but I'm trying to understand what he means, and I think that's maybe part of our discussion in a second. Yeah. The modern version is probably due down to a guy called Karl Popper in his book, The Logic of Scientific Discovery. He avoids the problem of induction and the necessity to verify first principles by just dismissing them altogether. And he basically, introduces this idea of falsification. You don't need to verify something, you just need to falsify one of the conclusions or predictions, and then the theory must be false. Now, whilst that can be a help when you're doing scientific investigation, what very often happens nowadays is that if something contradicts a theory, they actually throw away the experiment and say, no, our theory's still correct, we'll just discount that experiment, or they'll modify the theory slightly to somehow, encompass that, funny observation. Yeah. And I think, as we all know, the falsification for us is very clearly the contradictions of water, right? And the absurd properties that they would like to assign to water.
Yeah.
But this is just still a general overview into what these things mean. And here's a kind of summary of the overall problem. It's called the arc of Aristotelian logic, which I think here on this page kind of summarizes what we just talked about. The fact that you have inductive logic or you have deductive logic, which is based on first principles of demonstration.
Yeah.
And, the big question is, what is a self-evident first principle and how do we get them? Yeah. So I'd like to go back to that question, because I think that's the one that, will hopefully bring more clarity and why we're doing this short hangout, Dale. And we have, if you like, this example about Euclid's elements. And I think you picked out a little slide share thing. Do you want to share that?
No, I just keep it simple, and you can skip through it, save swapping screens backwards and forwards, mate.
All right, hold on. Then let me just call up a page here.
Just be careful what you're sharing there.
Yep. Hold on, just give me 1 sec.
These fucking cult lunatics have got us in eggshells.
Yeah, it's bad enough, isn't it?
Aye, scared to share the screen in case they come in and fucking play porn. Lunatics. You still there?
I'm still here. I'm just trying to find my correct screen here to show this. Just 1 sec. I think I need to stop sharing and share another one. So you can see me. All right, send.
Yeah.
And just let me bring up this other page. You're in fucking eggshells now too, now that you mentioned that. So this one. Can you see that?
Aye, that's us.
Aye?
Yep.
Okay, so this is a I'm not sure what happens if I put this on big screen. Probably best. Is that better? Right, isn't it? Right.
Much better.
Okay, so this is just a randomly selected whatever presentation by some person about Euclid's geometry. Just to step through what this means. Obviously, geometry means, you know, geo and metry is to measure, and it's basically earth measuring. So it's a branch of mathematics concerned with questions of shape, size, positions of figures, and the properties of space, is what they like to call it. And this is the geometry which everybody's familiar with. This guy apparently lived 300 BC. He's got a 2,000-year-old book called The Elements, and it basically deals with everything points and lines and planes. Now, he's basically known as the father of geometry. So this is probably one of the most influential works in the history of maths. If The Elements, Euclid deduced the principles of what is now called Euclidean geometry from a small set of axioms.
Yeah.
Now, Euclid also wrote some other stuff, but this is his major work. And there's, you know, the scientists all over the world will tell you that if Euclid fails, then the whole fucking world comes tumbling down, right? You know, there's nothing that didn't use this book, right? So there's 13 of them, and it's a collection of definitions, postulates, propositions, and mathematical proofs of the propositions. And it's the most successful and influential textbook, you know, basically ever written. Yeah. So Euclid basically started off with 5 postulates, the four of which are here, that a straight line may be drawn from any one point to any other point. A terminated line can be produced indefinitely. So a terminated line is what we would today call a line segment. And basically he's saying that you can extend that on both sides as far as you want. Yeah. A circle can be drawn with any center and radius. As we know, all circles are the same. Yeah, they just have a different radius, but they all behave in the same way with that circumference to diameter ratio. And the other thing was that all right angles are equal to one another. So a postulate is a statement which is assumed to be true. So Euclid basically said, I'm going to assume these things to be true. These are my first principles. I'm not going to prove them to you. And the question that we have, Dale, is, you know, why did he pick those 4? And, you know, did he have any justification for doing it?
Where did they come from? That's exactly it. Where did they formulate these things from? It's just a light bulb moment, you know? Or was he taking it direct from his everyday experience of reality?
I would say it would be the second one, but let's come to that in a second. So just to take a little bit of the bull out of this, you know, a straight line is basically what we mean when we say a horizontal line, yeah? One of the other definitions of this first one was a line is a line with all points that lie evenly within itself. Yep. That's another definition of that. And if you think of right angles, then we're talking here about perpendiculars, right? So we're talking about, you know, horizontal straight lines, and we're talking about plumb bobs, perpendiculars, right?
Yep.
So, and the circle stuff, I think, is fairly clear. So of those 4 postulates, basically nobody had a real problem with them, although the first one is a point of contention, which we'll come to. But his 5th one was the one that got everybody excited. And this is the one that tries to define what is the definition of parallel lines. So what do parallel lines mean? If a straight line falling in 2 straight lines makes the sum of the interior angles on the same side less than 2 right angles, then the 2 straight lines, if extended indefinitely, meet on the side in which the angle sum is less than 2 right angles. So basically, if these angles are less than 180, then these 2 lines are going to converge, yeah? If you see it that way. So this was the postulate where everybody said, wow, that looks awful complicated. Could you not really deduce that one from the first 4? So could we not really just start with those 4 and this one will somehow fall out of it? And mathematicians tried for hundreds and hundreds of years. Everybody's had a fucking go at this, Dale, right? Yeah. Doesn't matter. You name any mathematician and they had a go at it.
Yeah.
Of trying to deduce the 5th from the first 4. All failed. So people went on to, how should I say, think of other ways of what to do with this postulate. This guy's given us some detail here about, you know, he proved 28 propositions until he used the 5th, but I don't think that's very important. So mathematicians worked on proving this possible theorem, but all came up short. everybody tried and failed. In the 19th century, an accurate understanding of this postulate occurred. So they tell us anyway.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to prove the fifth postulate, they started to play with it, with things that were logically equivalent. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, again, in a formal science like mathematics, logically equivalent does not equate to truth, right? So I can make something logically equivalent, but it might not be true. One of the most famous is a guy called Playfair, Scottish guy, 18th century. Again, we're talking the 1700s here. And he basically formulated it in a slightly different way, where he said, through a point, not on a line, there is exactly one line parallel to the given line. Now, I think there's probably 100 definitions of this parallel postulate. And, you know, most of them are equivalent in some way or another. But this is probably one of the most famous ones. Here it is, you know, in a diagram, given a line and a point, not on the line, there is one line that's parallel to it. And we can say that Euclid's geometry is that geometry which holds the parallel postulate. So then we come to non-Euclidean geometry. So if you start to play with those 5 axioms, especially the first one, the definition of a right line, the fourth one, the definition of what perpendicular means, and the fifth one, the definition of parallel lines, then if you play with those postulates, or you ignore one of them, or you change one of them, then that's when non-Euclidean geometry comes out. Yeah. And remember, we're always talking here about a formal science that's using axioms and definitions and not a natural science, right? Here's one of my favorite guys, sarcasm on, Mr. Bernhard Riemann, who came up with the idea of replacing Euclid's axioms with their opposites. So off we go down this merry road. Again, nothing to do with reality, right? This is just a guy making stuff up, right? In a formal way and defining it. And he's saying that 2 points may determine more than one line, or all lines are finite in length but endless, and there are no parallel lines. So you can see that 1, 2, and 5 have been modified. Yeah. Number 2 is quite interesting, because if all lines are finite, as in on a ball, then you can basically go around the circumference of the Earth once. That's a finite length. Yeah. But because you can keep on going and do it again and again and again, they call it endless. Yeah. So all lines are finite in length, but endless is basically the definition now of spherical geometry. Yeah. As opposed to planar geometry. And there's one more called hyperbolic geometry, just so that people know that there are 3 two-dimensional geometries. One of them is planar, the other one's spherical, as per Mr. Riemann, and the other one's hyperbolic, as per Boyle and Lobachevsky, were the 2 guys that played around with them. So he basically redefines what perpendiculars are, and how straight lines can behave, and how the sum of triangles are greater than 180. And I love this little sentence here: do these make sense? Yeah. Depends what you mean by sense, right? They do if we imagine space as like the surface of a sphere. So mathematical wonderland starts here, right? And I would think that, you know, there is absolutely no sensible perception that we can make that would make sense of that, apart from the way your eyes work. Yeah. So the way your eyes work, people, is very obviously you have a globe inside your head. In fact, you have 2 of them if you're of good health. And yes, you can see parallel lines converging like railway tracks, and you turn round and you can see them converging the other way. So yes, the definition of spherical geometry is very, 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 very similar to the way your eyes work. Yeah. I don't want to go into that in too much detail here. What we're basically saying here is that you have to imagine rather than have sensible perceptions here. And basically, spherical geometry is all about 2 dimensions of longitude and latitude, and the position of objects on the surface of a ball. Yeah. And there's that distinction I've said many a time. A 2-dimensional sphere is not the same as a 3-dimensional ball. A 2-dimensional sphere will you need 2 variables. You need your angle up the way, if you like, and your angle left and right to define the position of something on a sphere. So spherical geometry is all about the geometry of position, and it is used in astronomy as per the celestial sphere, It's used in surveying if you're looking to find your position on a sphere, and it's also used in navigation, in that you can use latitude and longitude to determine where to go and what directions to take.
Yeah.
So spherical geometry is two-dimensional, and it's all about the geometry of position.
Yeah. But you're the centre of the sphere, and that's how you see it. It's know that you're actually on the outside of a sphere.
That's exactly the differentiation that needs to be made. Yeah. So, you know, we've talked about this, Dale. Maybe this is the right time to do it. But if I go outside at night and I lie on my back and I see the stars, then my visual perception is of a dome.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I think there is a dome up there.
No.
It's just that I know that the way my eyes work, the things that I see, the visible objects that I see are registered, their positions are registered on the inside of a visual sphere. I don't know a better way to call it. I'm going to call it a visual sphere. And it's obvious to anybody who goes outside at night, they will have that same visual perception that I do.
Yeah.
And one thing that I do want to say is that when it's light again, so during the day, my vision, the capabilities of my vision and how I see will not change just because it's going from nighttime to daytime. The physiology of my eye doesn't change. It's going to function the same way. So I might not necessarily see during the day this dome-like visual perception because I'm inside in little boxes all the time, yeah, in rooms, and so people don't notice it. But your perception, your visual perception, is always spherical, yeah. And that also has huge impact on when we talk about perspective, right? So, you know, there's things like the sum of the angles of a triangle are greater than 180 degrees. That's something to do with spherical geometry. There is no such thing as similarity in spherical geometry. So you can't have two triangles and scale them the way you can on a plane. And it doesn't matter how big those triangles are, they'll still add up to 180 degrees. On a sphere, they add up to some sum. It could be greater than 180 degrees. And if a triangle adds up to that sum, then there only is one triangle that can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is not multiple triangles that can do it. Yeah. So these are the kind of differences. And the main difference between Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry is that instead of describing a plane as a flat surface, a plane becomes a sphere. Yeah. And a line on the sphere is a great circle, which is any circle on the sphere that has the same center as the sphere. And again, you can see that's very close to the way we, again, have visual perception. You are at the center of a sphere, yeah? Your own visual sphere, yeah?
Yeah.
So the big question comes then, are Euclid's postulates true in spherical geometry? Well, let's have a look. Through any 2 points, there is exactly one line. Yeah, there's yeah, you can see that, the great circle. Through any 3 points not on the same line, there is exactly one plane. Also true, yeah. And I think there's a line contains at least 2 points, true, and all right angles are congruent. Okay, so 4 of these are true. But what people have to notice here is that just because we've redefined the meaning of words, that's the only reason it's true.
Yeah.
They are formally true. Do they actually make sense in the sense of self-evident truths and natural science? That's not what this is saying, right? No. It's saying these things are formally correct if I use those formal definitions. That's all it's saying when it says true, right? Yeah. It doesn't mean truth in the sense that we would mean it. Is the parallel postulate true in spherical geometry? Well, they say here none, therefore the parallel postulate is false in spherical geometry, given that, you know, how many lines can you draw through the point that are parallel? Except for the circle in the middle, the horizontal circles do not share a center and therefore cannot be considered parallel, even though they appear to be parallel. So, you know, everybody knows that these things are called parallels, right? That's what they call parallel, yeah? But yeah. It's a redefinition of the terms and the words that's been done here. So anyway.
What we have to do is identify these, where we get them from, and what, you know, attribute them to some external source in the objective world. So we'll get to that though, obviously. I'll let you get through that bit.
Yeah. So remember, points and lines are undefined terms. The meaning comes only from postulates. So if we change the postulate, we can change the meaning of points, lines, planes, and how they interact with each other. So, you know, I don't know how much clearer this has to be made to people because, you know, I mean, here's just any old random guy talking about non-Euclidean geometry is basically saying the same thing. We can change the meaning, yeah, and changing the postulates. So that's all we're doing in mathematics, right? And then it comes here, I love this one. Why bother studying spherical geometry? Because the Earth is a sphere.
Look, there's a cartoon.
So I mean, this is where the people jump. So I mean, here's obviously somebody who's made a presentation. You know, seems to be factually correct. You know, in as much as what he's saying is saying the textbook geometry, but he's again completely ignoring first principles and making circular reasoning here, right? You know, I mean, there's absolutely no proof from what's just been said or told that the Earth is a sphere. Yep. What, you know, mathematics doesn't provide measurable curve, right? Because there's no natural science involved. It's a formal science that plays with the meanings of words and the definitions of words. Yeah. So, you know, I find this preposterous in here in the middle. Yeah. But hey, that seems to be the norm for scientific endeavor nowadays.
Yeah.
So, yeah, now I've said it before, two-dimensional geometry means basically longitude and latitude. These are the only two variables you need. They're the same variables that you have when you look at something and you try to determine the position of something in your visible field. You will basically point your head upwards and catch what the altitude or elevation is, or you will turn your head left or right and you will try and catch how far is it off some reference point.
Yeah.
The left to right is longitude and the up and down is latitude. Yeah. And they're the only 2D variables you need if you're thinking of visual perception. And the same two variables are what they use for navigation, astronomy, and for surveying. I think that's probably enough of this. I just wanted to give people the kind of general overall background knowledge here, but I think most of this we can just skip over and go back to the main thing here now, Del. Yeah.
Yep.
So you can probably still see that. I think I need to reshare something again. Just one sec. So it'll be this one. Yeah. So we've just had a wee butchers at this example of Euclid. Yeah. And the definition, but what we wanted to go back to was to look at his first four postulates, yeah, and ask ourselves exactly what did Euclid base his axioms and his assumptions on? How did he formulate them the way he did? You know, how did he come to it? And I think, you know, what I can see at least, Del, is that he's drawing on his experience and his sensory perceptions. Yeah.
Yeah.
We know that common sense faculties are the basis for all knowledge. You know, I think we discussed that in a hangout, you know, a couple of weeks ago. Common sense, warranted and justified, that, you know, your common sense is the basis of knowledge. We have a natural language. We've discussed this as well, that we don't need to speak words necessarily to convey things between each other. We can demonstrate to each other. We have body, we have facial mannerisms, you know, we can do all kinds of things to make ourselves understood. And nature makes itself very understood by speaking to us in a language that we seem to have forgotten.
Yeah.
And for me, if I wanted to define what the definition of a straight line is, then I couldn't think of anything better than water level, right? So since we know that, you know, water from one point to another always has the same elevation, then it would be the perfect definition of a straight line. Another one would be the horizon, your eye level, the fact that, you know, what you see, the horizontal line that you see when you look far away is always straight. You know, there is no bend left or right. Yeah. And we also have, if you like, our internal gyroscope, right? You know, the fluids in our ears, which make sure that we know what our orientation is up and down.
Yeah.
So for me, sorry, I go.
No, which, you know, up, down, you know, every other direction can only start from the straight line. It has to start from the level.
Yep. And another thing that, you know, I think is important maybe to highlight here is the definition of parallel. So we were talking about this earlier, but if there's a lake high up in a mountain, yeah, and the water on there is perfectly level, and there's another lake at the bottom of the mountain, then the surface of that lake in the mountain and the surface at the bottom of the mountain are going to be parallel to each other. Yeah.
Yep.
You know, for me, that would be a perfect definition of parallel, that water is level. It doesn't matter at which elevation it is. Yeah. And again, the same goes true for the horizon eye level. If you to elevate yourself, then it rises to your eye level. And all of those individual elevation lines would also be parallel to each other based on what your eyes see.
Yeah.
So my kind of, how should I say, I've got no proof for this, Del, but, you know, what my intuition is telling me is that Euclid was an observer of nature. Yeah. And if I was to have a good guess at why did he define things the way they are, then I would pretty assume that he's talking about how his vision works, and he's talking about the natural substance of water.
Well, it has to be, you know, for me, I'm the same. Of course, no proof, but, you know, you enter into, you know, ideas that he just had a light bulb moment that comes from nowhere for no reason, which is just useless. You know, anybody's reasoning has to come from experience. That's where you get it. That's when you formulate it. So for me, you know, if he's using these axioms, these applications, it comes from the observed world. So he's assuming that he's on a plane, and that's how his calculations were formulated. And again, the calculations that were formulated were then used and applied for centuries to come, and they'll continue to be used. So, you know, you have to ask the question, well, if that's where it's coming from, then it doesn't apply to a sphere. You know, and it doesn't matter about people saying, oh, but just locally you assume it. No, fuck off. You know, a sphere, the geometry of a sphere dictates in every direction that it's curving away. These postulations would never have worked. There wouldn't have been an application for it. So again, it comes back to it. Where naturally would you get it? You get it for your experience, you know. Observation of the water. It's a flat, parallel, level line. You know, he understands his vision, his internal gyroscope, his balance equates to being parallel with the earth underneath him. You know, and just as you say, you know, things like the surface of a water at the top of a lake, up the mountain range, or at the bottom, that's where you're going to get your definition of parallel for. You know, so for anybody to postulate any of these things, it must come from some sort of direct observation of their experience. It's not just happening like, you know, some new age idiots would believe that angels or fairies injected these ideas into his mind. You know, they're coming from practicality. So we have to then look at, well, where in practical reality would they have got these from, you know?
Yep. And again, how did he get them? Because, you know, we've discussed this too about, you know, if now that I'm an adult, I can discuss things like deduction and induction and reason and logic, right? Yep. But if I think of myself as a child, then I don't have that capability. I didn't think, you know, to come back to the example of Xander, you know, Xander didn't sit there reasoning, oh, let me see, spherical geometry, will it hold water? You know, he didn't go through any reasoning process. It was a self-evident truth to him that was what he had to do, right?
So that's why I say that. We have to look at that. We have to negate this adult process of inductive, deductive, and reasoning and all that shite, because we know in an infant at 4 years old they don't have that process. So there has to be some sort of constitutional thing there where it doesn't have to be reasoned, it doesn't have to be given, you know, any proof or any definitions. It's just a natural process. How am I going to transport the liquid? I need something that's hollow. You know, simple.
Yep. No need to be told, no need to be taught. It's not custom, it's not habit, it's intuitional content. As far as I'm concerned, driven by your constitution. We come with it. It is the way it is. You know, I don't want to go into a speculation about who did it, why did they do it, they did to creationism. Let's just say it is what it is. And that's a first principle that we can just agree on. Because if we can agree on that, then we can actually talk to each other on the basis of that.
Exactly.
Again, if I look at the regress of reason, if we don't have first principles, how the hell are we going to progress and discuss things? You know. So
again, the applied practical world shows that these principles are true and that they work. You know, so you take the Euclidean principles and go to an engineer or, you know, somebody that's going to fabricate a theoretical bridge 100 miles long, and my landscape is over a body of water that is, you know, the same depth in every point, 3 meters deep. the whole way. You know, they're going to use the Euclidean principles of plane geometry, and they're going to construct each section plumb and level to the next, and that's how the thing would be put together. So if you take that as a theoretically and then try and apply that to a globe, what's going to happen? You're going to have your bridge going away in here with this unaccounted fucking gap underneath it. It's just preposterous. That's not what the applied world tells you, you know? So...
Yep. Yeah, I always laugh at that preposterous one where they say people who build bridges take the curve of the earth into account. And then, you know, I don't know whatever how many inches are missing on the side, but just the very thought of the logistics involved in that, you know, delivering parts, you know, to what precision would they have to be so that the whole thing fits into a curve? I mean, it's just nonsensical, you know. Production facilities don't work like that. They work on hammering things out flat, horizontal, perpendicular, you know. You don't get bendy bridges coming out, you know. So
you know, the people who say this about the flat Earth and people's beliefs in flat Earth, well, you get this guy like Euclid who had to assume that he was on a plane. That's where he's coming from. That's where his postulations, you know, have arrived at. That's the applications. So, you know, you get this pillar in the scientific community that's held up there, that's shown beyond any shadow of a doubt that, you know, the Earth is a plane. It has to be, or these things would never work, you know?
Yep, and I mean, he certainly didn't write a book, you know, like assuming a sphere and then going on to give us all these wonderful tools to build houses, you know? So I don't know, the last time I looked, I wasn't living in a curved house, you know? My floorboard's pretty level. I've got perpendicular fucking walls, Dell, you know, and I'm sure that's what everybody experiences. So, you know,
plumb and level just seems to be, you know, right through the whole of nature. As I was explaining to you earlier, I mean, even in the animal kingdom, they seem to have this, you know, like Euclidean understanding, you know, of how a cheetah knows to cut the angle in order to get to a gazelle. It just seems to happen intuitively. You know, so it is there. It's within the constitution of all living things. You know. So,
yeah, I think in animals, it's very obvious. You know, the example of a cat's a great one. You know, or anything of the cat family. When you see cats poised and they give that beady stare, and then they can jump onto things and balance. You know, or you can flip them up in the air and they always come back down on their feet. You know, I mean. There's no way that, you know, whether it's a lion chasing a gazelle or a cat, that they're actually doing, you know, spherical geometrical calculations in their fucking head, you know? I mean,
there's no inductive or deductive reasoning process. They just, you know, it's a fundamental that they're balanced to the level, and that, you know, they calculate the angular jump, how much power they need, and it all just happens intuitively, instinctively. So it seems to be written deeply in the constitution of all living things, you know.
Yep, that's exactly the way I see it too, and I think that's where Euclid drew his inspiration for his first axioms. You know, I can't think of any other way. Again, you know, I'm not saying I'm proving anything here, but you know, it seems to me to be self-evident that could be the only way it happens. You know,
exactly. So there's a distinction that people need to get between the two, Euclidean and non-Euclidean, you know, and what we're talking about, because the non-Euclidean aspects are to do with, you know, astronomical situations, vision. You know, they're not about the earth and its, you know, practicality, its substances. So people have to realise the difference between the two of them. You can see how they've been meshed, and if you did show it at the end of that wee slide, you can see it. You know, where, oh, we don't have to have, you know, we can both work together and no disagree. But there has to be a separation and an understanding of where the two things are applied and what they actually mean. But in regards to everyday living and practicality, you know, we're using the Euclid's principles of a plane, and they work and they continue to work, and they're used every single day by everybody. So you can't negate that and say, oh, but it's just locally flat, it's curving somewhere. I mean, fuck off.
And sorry, on you go.
On you go.
Well, I'll just say this, you know, redefinition of words. You know, I mean, we've talked about this before. This, you know, redefinition of level, where, you know, the mathematicians will say, you know, level is the perpendicular, you know, the 90-degree angle to a point, you know, to a line straight to the center of the earth. You know, and they'll say that level's everything. You know, which is why if you're in Australia, you know, you're still on the level. But if you think about the definition of water that we just discussed about it being parallel, and you have a mountain here with a lake, yeah, and you have another mountain here, right? Then these two things aren't parallel anymore, So
they're parallel to the equal tangent to the centre of gravity or some shit like that. They're not parallel to each other, though, are they? No.
And again, a point I can't hammer enough is the fact that mathematics is a formal science, right? Logic doesn't mean things are true. If your premises are untrue, then you can be talking utter shite. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, I gave that's going to be missing from this, because I gave that wee example at the start, the previous one, for whatever reason we lost. And it was that wee story that I gave about the three people investing to buy a TV. And the TV costs 30 quid, and they both chip in £10 each. So we use the language, we separate the language and the objective substance aspect. So in the language aspect, the three guys are now £10 out, which is correct. So when the shop owner returns and says there's a £5 discount and gives the salesperson £5 coins, that person on his journey to give these people their discount takes one of the pounds, puts it in his pocket, leaving 4. He then gets to the three guys, gives them 1 each. So in the language aspects, these three guys now truly are out £9 each, which is true. So you add the 3 9s, makes 27. You've got 1 left over as 28, and you've got 1 in the pocket as 29. There's a missing aspect here, but it's not that the substance is missing. The £30 and the physicality continue to exist. It's just that the way you phrased it using language, which is correct, says
formally correct.
Formally correct. The three guys are out, truly £9 each, because they've got a return of 1 from their 10. So 3 9s is 27. The 1 left over is 28. The 1 in the pocket is 29. So it just shows you how these things can be manipulated. But the difference is when you separate the language aspect, the substance always remained as 30, a property of 30.
Yes, yeah, and that's the same way. If I ask my my wife to fill up the bathwater for me, she's not going to transport the water on the outside of a bucket. So I know for a fact that is not possible, right? And so if you cut through the bullshit words, right, which can be confusing, right, which can be very sophisticated, where they've had hundreds of years to practice, and just look at the substance and how the substance behaves, it's shite, yeah? It's bullshit, and that's why we need to be absolutely solid and secure in that knowledge.
Exactly. But again, the problem arises because of the institutions and the TV and the image. It's this image, and the workings that are surrounding the image that confuses people. When it comes down to that simple fact, mate, how does the substance behave? What are its properties? What are the capabilities of the substance? That tells us that the image that's being depicted is bullshit. And it's as simple as that, Again, we're talking about the natural sciences, what it means as individuals to provide proofs to each other, and it comes to practicality. So as you say, the exterior object, whether it be a cube, a triangle, a fucking ball, you're no transporting liquid at Disney Hod liquid. It's impossible. So
Yep.
Yeah.
No, but that's what they'll play on. They'll try all these different manipulative techniques. They'll use their sophistry. They'll show the images, and weak-minded people will be swayed by it. They'll bow to authority. They're conditioned to think that they don't know enough. We're even conditioned not to believe our senses. We've said this a million times, but you can't contradict, live life, and be a hypocrite and reject it all. Yeah, for some absurd theory, just because somebody shows you a picture. How stupid is that? You get slapped if you did that anywhere. Do you know what I mean? In real life,
Exactly. But you remove the 100 years of TV and all its influence and stuff, and you go back 100 years with this fucking image. And you try and convince people back then and try and rob them of their constitutional, their everyday reality. Go back to Euclid and say, oh, here, Euclid, fuck you, mate, because look at my image. What's Euclid going to do then? Oh, well, I better rework all my axioms and my understandings of my objective reality, because this guy's showing me an image. We would never have progressed to what we have right now without that. So
no, absolutely. I mean, it's proof. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, right? So. And, again, the fact that self-evident truths are not necessarily provable, only demonstrable, or in that we both share the same constitution as sentient beings, we can both agree on the reality and the truth of that. That's where we have to agree in first principles to move forward. And that's the conversation they don't want to have, Del, nobody will go back. And you showed me, or you sent me a link to a very good interview. I think we touched on that earlier on, with so many parallels, right?
Yeah.
Where science is closing, there people are getting expelled for talking about things that they shouldn't be talking about, right? And it's the same philosophical problem that is being highlighted, which the globe cult religion wants to just pass over and ignore,
Exactly.
So,
it's pretty similar to like Rupert Sheldrake was highlighting, the dogmas that science has adopted. It seems to have this religious narrative of philosophical materialism. And the wee discussion you're referencing, for anybody that's interested, was between Ben Stein and R.C. Sproul. In fact, I'll just share that wee video. I sent it to you in
the Hangout chat. Right?
When was that? Was it a while ago or whatever? I can't mind.
No, it shouldn't be long ago. If you scroll up, it should be.
There it's there. There it's there. I've got it. Copy link address. So I'll pop that in the chat box for anybody that's interested. I liked it. I thought it was a great wee discussion between the two of them. I'm sure there'll be other people there that will.
And for me, it also highlights a little bit what happens behind closed doors. So there are people thinking about these things still, There are, academics and scientists who have the same doubts. They're obviously afraid to come out and talk about it, right? They don't have the balls because whatever, they're invested too much or whatever. But it's not the way it's portrayed by the globe trolls, right? Where they'll try and have all these accounts to make it seem as if there's hundreds and thousands of people. At the end of the day, there's no academic coming forward defending bendy water, right? There's no academic coming forward giving any real engineerable, measurable proof of the curvature of the Earth, right? Yeah. So none of that's happening. It's just, like celebrities and cosmologists and mathematical sophists. Yeah, it's
just all fallacious crap that they're coming with. Whether it's that or appeals to consensus, authority, generalizing. People talking from an individual perspective, like they represent the we. We, the scientific community. Fuck you and your we. What do you know, and what can you practically demonstrate to me as a human being? That's what counts. No, your appeals to utter cack.
Spot on.
So that was pretty much it. We have to look at that, and if for me, just to summarise it, if these are the applications that we're using, then you have to go back and think, well, where would Euclid, even just postulating that it was a real guy and it was genuine, taking all that for granted, I know, but we'll just suspend our disbelief and take it that it is true. You have to go to the mind and the reasoning of the man and think, well, where is he getting it from? And just like us, the only place to get it is from experience. What's reality saying? I see a straight horizontal line every fucking where I go. I see bodies are liquid. The surface is a straight horizontal line every fucking where I go. That's where you start to get that, and then you can find and get angles and measurements from a base that is a parallel, that is a line, a plane.
Yep. Yep. And the only way you can start to confuse people, I think, personally, is when you play upon the visual aspects of things, how your eyes work. That's when you can introduce spherical geometry, because that's where it applies. And that's where they can, I don't know, start their nonsense, and play on visual phenomena.
The simple people, it always comes back, and I'm going to keep repeating that. Any claims that are made to you, it's required to be backed by practicality, practical demonstration. That's what is the fundamental requirement of any of this. So if they can't bring that forth, there is no excuses. All that crap about, I can't demonstrate it because I need a mass the size of the Earth out in space and all that shite. Well, I can just make any old claim and come up with the same excuses. Well, I can't show you it because we're here. You know, I need to be in some other place to demonstrate it. But believe me, it's crap.
That's nonsense. Yep. I need a planet size to be able to show. And when you ask them the simple questions like, you know, what size does it need to be? What composition must it be? Then, you know, that's when they have no fucking answer, you know. And, you know, it's bullshit there too.
But in regards to the water, it's not just, you know, people get stuck in that at what, you know, and I've said, at what scale would it start to bend? It's not just at what scale. There would have to be an injection of some new energy, some unknown, unfathomable amount of new energy to give liquid or water this new ability, this new behaviour to bind itself together and to have an elasticity. You know, we don't see that. We can't demonstrate that in the real world. We can see it in a very small scale, like surface tension and meniscus, but, you know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a vast globe, you know, 24,000 miles in circumference with fucking oceans and rivers and lakes, with a massive amount of liquid on them. So it's, you know, they always jump to these false equivalencies. So
Yep, but that's just ignoratio elenchi, as Aristotle would have said. Just logical nuts.
Right. It wouldn't just require scale, it would require an injection of new energy. You know, it would be unfathomable to be able to mound it up. It's like in people's minds, they somehow think that the water's made of jelly, or it's like bricks that you can pile on top of each other. It doesn't work like
that. Just you can get it to become all gluey at a certain radius. Yes.
Aye. There's a magic membrane that appears once you get to a particular scale.
Well, I mean, they've got no, you know, they never exhaust of you know, dreaming up invisible forces that, you know, can do magical things. So, you know, they obviously think that that's possible, Dale, but, you know, unfortunately not demonstrable. Yeah.
No. And that's what they're starting for. They're starting for this image and then trying to work everything into fitting this fucking image. Just remove the fucker, you know? Stop, don't even go there. But that's people's problems. I know the majority of people here probably don't have that issue, but we're talking about the majority at large. That's the problems that they're encountering. They've been saturated so much, you know, through the media and their education, but with this religious symbol. You know, it's just like having a crucifix in your classroom. The globe's no fucking different. It's just imprinting you continually, you know.
Yep. And that's where you get, you know, I mean, I've got lots of love and compassion for my fellow man too, but I must say that the exasperation gets very high, Dale, when you have to bring these same obvious things to people and repeat and repeat and repeat. You know, I've spent a little bit of time on Twitter, you know, I had a Twitter offensive, and it's amazing. It's the same bunch of trolls, the same bunch of stupid questions, the same stuff, you know, wherever you look, yeah. And it does get exasperating. I mean, I did find myself sometimes being slightly vindictive and aggressive, but not because I don't like people or anything, just because I'm exasperated, you know. I mean, it's just like, you know, it's mind-numbing, you know. So,
it gets annoying because you expect them to have the intellectual honesty to accept facts that are being presented to them, and they just don't have that. But again, you know, we burn ourselves out when we get that bit between our teeth and we don't want to let go. It becomes a competition, and it can fucking drain you. As I said to you before, my first 6 months, it was like that. You know, I felt like, you know, it was a battle and I couldn't let go, and lying in my bed wired, fucking at 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't lose. I'm going to win. A lot of these people are just there to sap your energy like that. A lot of these accounts, they're not there to have honest discourse. You're not going to get resolve for any of them. You just need to recognise the signs, as I say. When you offer up objectivity facts and they just start to diverge and subvert and try and run away from it, for me, I'm like, right, fuck you. You're just a liar. You know, I'm not going to engage with you anymore.
That's the best way to handle it. Or use ridiculous.
Exactly.
Got a bad echo. That's gone there. Okay.
Don't burn yourself out with, I'm going to beat them.
No, I just like keeping my hand in sometimes, seeing if the arguments have changed, you know, doing a bit of ridicule, you know, just to see. And that was quite interesting. So I was shag tagging Twitter, you know, I mean, I was just playing with these hashtags and making ones up all the time. It was actually quite good fun, you know. So,
Yeah.
you know, like absurd claims and globe cult religion and disciples, and you know, so I actually had a bit of a laugh as well, you know. So, but that's all you can do sometimes. It's just ridicule their arguments, you know.
Aye, it's good for people as well if they want to sharpen their tools. You know, if they're on that process of understanding and they can see, you know, what's coming back at them, and then they can pull it apart and understand it a bit better, which is it's useful, you know. But you need to be careful that you don't get caught in it and get stuck.
Right.
Again, we're dealing with objectivity. It shouldn't be a battle and debate and arguments and all that stuff.
No, that's what they love to bring up, the false dichotomy of debating. Yes, yes.
Exactly.
That's the one they love. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be very wary of that. Yeah.
That's it, mate. That's it. So,
man, I don't have much more to say, so
that's fine, mate. It's the same.
Okay.
I say, I'll just let everybody know on Saturday we'll be back. Managed to, thanks to Dan, find a way so that we can't be sniped and we can still have a hangout and show everybody who's present in the hangout. So good stuff. I'll be here on Saturday, the usual time, and it'll be open. I'll just be posting the link direct into the chat. Again, if anybody requires an invitation and they want it sent to them privately, by all means email me, let me know. But failing that, you just need to show up at the live event and you'll see it being posted in the comment section. And I'll continue to do that. Hopefully the moderators will every 10 minutes or so stick the link in there. So
cool. Good man, Dan. Well done.
All right.
Glad that's sorted out. So
yeah, excellent.
All right, my man. I'll see you shortly, huh?
Hey, well, mate. Cheers. Take it easy.
Look after yourself. Bye.
Mate.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
I'll just come and say a quick hello to the chat box and a hello and a cheerio. How's it going, people? PV Angel, how you doing? Mac Daddy, Ute, Groovin Sooth 2, Juan Carlos, Robert Matthews, how you doing? H2 is not water, look into it. Peace to all. Emerald Rider debate is no diff than politics. Thanks, guys. Great hangout aside from the glitch. Cheers, mate. You unbelief Brent Humphreys, Elisa. Oh, fuck. Flat Earth Underground, how you doing, mate? Brian Watson, P900 Cool Picks, how you doing? Brent Humphreys, Michael Carson, how you doing, mate? Stuart McKenzie. Levi Foster, Dill, who's asking? Right, people, anyway. I'll see everybody on Saturday. Take it easy, much appreciated as always, people. As I say, I couldn't even put a thank you in the chat box the other night. I refreshed the page and the chat box was gone, so apologies for that, people, and I'll see you on Saturday. Take it easy.